Hello, everyone. Today, my guest is Michael Siciliani from Collaborative Construction Management. Today, we're going to be talking about the currently hot topic of converting office buildings into residential buildings. And Michael is uniquely qualified to discuss this topic because he's been managing these type of construction projects for over 25 years and has probably completed more of these types of conversion projects than anyone else. So, welcome, Michael.
Thank you, Stephen. Very nice to be with you today.
Likewise. So, before we get into the discussion of the commercial to residential conversions, can you just tell our audience a little about your career and your company?
Sure. Collaborative Construction Management and its predecessor, Newmore Construction Services, was formed in 1997 in direct response to a zoning change that allowed for these deep, older, obsolete office buildings, mainly in the financial district of Manhattan, to be converted to residential use. Since that time, we've converted 40 buildings, over 10 million square feet, into more than 10,000 apartments.
So I know that CCM acts as a construction manager and sometimes acts as an owner representative. And in case some of our listeners are not familiar with these terms, I was wondering if you could just briefly explain, what these roles are and how they benefit your clients.
Sure. So as construction managers in the traditional construction management arrangement, the direct employees of collaborative construction management, or we call it CCM, they are responsible for the hands-on coordination of the field operations on a construction site. As owner representatives, we act in a more of a consulting role. We bring our experience and expertise to the design and planning and logistics of a project, usually before it starts. And then as it goes, whether the owner is acting as their own contractor or they hire somebody else to contract, we leverage our buying partner, or excuse me, our buying power and our trusted trade partner relationships to bring to bear good result for our customers.
I'm curious if you have if you think for these types of projects, if you have any preference, like do you think you get a better result, or does it really just depend on the needs of the owner or the landlord, like for construction management versus acting as an owner rep? Do you see any difference or benefits for one or the other, or does it really depend?
Yeah, I think that it's we do owner's rep jobs on projects that we would not normally take on ourselves. Like, for example, we stay in our lane. We do these large, commercial to residential conversions. Although at the end of the day, we're building an apartment house, and so people who build apartments out of the ground sometimes will hire us because they know that we're buying kitchens and toilets and mirrors and flooring, and we're just buying it at such a scale that we can help them buy their brand new out of the ground projects more competitively.
So then, in addition to conversion projects, I think your firm does other types of work as well. So do you want to just speak to that, just so our audience gets an idea of sort of like the full scope of things that you can perhaps help them with?
Sure. So our clients have very diverse real estate, holdings, whether it be commercial, residential, trade school, warehouses, et cetera. And we're often asked to get involved in large scale capital improvements. We did a million square feet at a building downtown called 7 Hanover Square, recently renamed 100 Pearl Street. It was a total infrastructure upgrade for a million square feet. There, we did a vocational trade school out in Long Island City, which we're just finishing. We did a landmark lobby on Union Square West. So, we tried to respond to our clients' needs, but the bulk of our business has been this large scale office to residential conversion.
Sure. How about, can you just tell us, just to sort of get some context here? Um, what was one of your first projects, and maybe I don't know if there were challenges involved, like sort of that were maybe different then than now, maybe, or maybe you've sort of there was a learning curve. I don't know, but just tell us maybe about one of your first projects and what was that like?
So, my very first projects was before I had my own company. I was converting warehouse buildings to commercial buildings out in Brooklyn on the Brooklyn waterfront, which is now known as Dumbo. But before it was known as Dumbo, it's just a bunch of old buildings that needed to be renovated and industry changed. And they went from being factory and warehouse buildings to back office space. So, I've been doing that a long time. And then in 1996, when the zoning law got changed to allow for these deeper floor plated buildings in lower Manhattan, in what used to be called Silicon Alley, but pretty much in the financial district. One of my customers had a building down there that had a very low occupancy rate and said, I'd like to try a conversion, and I see you know how to put together all the pieces. Will you do it for me? And thus, launched my business. And the interesting part about that particular project, although it was a 400,000 square foot building, um, this idea of converting an office building to apartments was pretty novel at the time. There was only one or two other ones that had been done. So the landlord elected to not go all in, but only take the top half of the building and convert it. So the first thing we needed to do was take the remaining office tenants that were left in the building and consolidate them to the bottom of the building, the lower 7 floors. And we had to keep them alive. We had to keep their power and their water and their toilets and their sprinkler, et cetera, and their lobby and their elevators alive while we were building out 440 apartments above them. So that, we learned how to uh, do that tricky logistics maneuver at that point. And from there, our business really took off. People saw what we had done. We did it quickly. We did it inexpensively, and it was a great success. And in fact, anecdotally, just thought of it. It's about 25 years later. That same landlord has called us back to convert the lower commercial floors that we didn't convert 25 years ago because he's got no commercial tenants down there.
I think you mentioned this. That this was like it was back in the '90s. I'm curious. So in that project, it sounds that like it was a partial conversion. So is that was that like, pretty unique, or do you see is there an interest in that, and is that really like a viable solution to have like a mixed use, or does it depend on the zoning? What do you think about
Yeah,
that?
there are a number of factors. Some buildings currently you cannot convert 100% as of right. I think there's some cutoff. I think it's 1979 or 78 or something. Um, that you can only convert a certain FAR, which takes you to about 50% of the building. So we are seeing more and more mixed use buildings, and we're looking for a variety of different landlords in the city at ways to convert, half a building. And we usually separate them by elevator banks. You do the high rise residential, and you keep everybody in the low rise or the podium or the deepest part of the building as commercial. That is a viable solution.
That makes a lot of sense to me, 'cause especially if you're saying that the FAR is an issue, that maybe you have combined use. I know in other countries I've seen that more common, where they have the retail, the commercial, and then the residential on top. So maybe the rest of this country you were seeing more of that, but I think that would probably be a good solution. And also, I think it would probably enhance the neighborhoods as well if you have that mixed use, where it's not specifically like a commercial district. There's also a residential component and a mix, which I think is a lot of what you've you've probably done
Yeah, I
downtown.
mean, when I first started downtown in the financial district at 6 o'clock at night, when you walked outside the office, I mean, there was nobody. It was ghost town. And now, there are people with dogs and strollers, and it's really changed quite a bit.
Right, it's like a different neighborhood altogether. So
For,
the I think COVID sort of was the sort of impetus that sort of has driven the work from home movement. And I mentioned to you, sort of off camera and other conversations that I'm not like a big fan of work from home. Personally, I'm just more productive um, at the office, and also a lot of my clients are office landlords, so I'm just not really on board with the work from home thing. So, do you think there's other things sort of driving what other things are sort of have been driving the sort of conversion process lately? I mean, I think, you've been doing this for a long time, and I don't know if it's always been the same things or, now we have this recent sort of interrupter, but, what sort of motivates landlords? Like, what's the primary driver here?
it's I think getting back to work from home. I agree with you. I think people are not as productive as I'm not as productive at home as I am from at my desk at work. And we're in the construction business. It's a very hands-on business. You got to be there. So we never work from home even during COVID. So yeah, what's driving people? I mean, what's driving people is that the office occupancy is way down, and it's become, the economics are just such that these office buildings, and particularly the older office buildings, just can't compete with a newer office building that's been built in the last 10 or 20 years. So I think that that's really the biggest driver.
Right. So, do you have any suggestions? Let's say you're the owner of an older building. Are there any things that you think that you can think of from a constructive perspective that could potentially increase the value, increase the cash flow, or just sort of make the building more attractive for their tenants? What
Yeah,
any
I mean,
suggestions there?
I think people are doing what they've always done to attract new tenants, which is update the lobby, update the elevators, change the windows, change the storefront, be more selective about the retail tenants. Um, Create some amenity in the building, whether it's a gym or a coffee bar or whatever it is, to kind of create a more interesting atmosphere for the people who are coming to the office.
Right. I recently saw on TV, Mayor Adams was touring one of your current projects at 160 Water Street, and then there was a big write-up in the New York Times a few weeks ago that mentioned the building next door, 180 Water Street. So I know I think there's a big time lapse between those two projects, but can you sort of tell us a little bit about them, how they came about, and just generally?
Sure. So 180 Water was, built in the mid to late 70s. Had a very deep floor plate. Had a curtain wall. Office buildings, as you know, um, their windows don't necessarily need to open. So the windows were inoperable, and they're tinted to save energy. So in a residential building, we changed the windows to operable, and we put clear glass in them, so it's more attractive for a residential setting. The trick at 180 Water was that it was so deep that first of all, anybody who was looking at it as an office building couldn't afford it and didn't want it. It was a tired old office building. It needed a lot of work. It's also about 500,000 square feet. There weren't too many 500,000 square foot tenants looking at it. And it would have required a major overhaul, and then tenant specific interior finishes. So but for a converter, um, they would wind up spending maybe the same amount of money, but the upside was that a residential tenant would pay a lot more on a per square foot basis than a commercial tenant in this location. The problem here was, again, light and air, because the building was very deep, and there are zoning restrictions about how far away you can be from a legal source of light and ventilation. So the architect in this case uh, came up with an ingenious idea of creating a light court. So we cut out 30 by 40 feet on every floor, 24 floors up, and we took that square footage that we removed from the building that was used to create light and air for any interior units, and we put it back on top of the building. So we actually built another 6 floors with a setback and a swimming pool and an indoor outdoor amenity space on top of the building. So that was a wildly successful project because we kind of took something that looked like a lemon and made lemonade out of it. And it's beautiful. It's one of the projects that I'm most proud of. At 160 Water, which is directly next door to it, um, we had a very similar situation, but because of some other zoning quirks with lot area coverage, we were not making a hole in the building open to the sky would not have left us, given the setback requirements, would not have left us very efficient floor plate to add so much. So there, the architect took another very clever tact, which was this notion of creating what are called blind shafts. So we literally removed the floor area and encased it so that you could never step on it again. So in essence, the floor area is gone. It will never be used. So what did that do? It made for the apartments to be not as deep. And again, we took that square footage and we put it up on top of the existing structure. So there we're adding 7 floors on top, and it will also have an indoor outdoor amenity. And these are big buildings. These are nearly 600 apartments each. I'm delighted to see that our elected officials are paying attention to what we're doing now because I really do think it is the future. It's good for a lot of reasons. They're losing the city is losing tax revenue from these office buildings being empty or half empty, and it's the conversion process restores the building. It keeps the structure intact. It's kind of we recycle it, so to speak, so has a small carbon footprint relative to building a new building. We put in whatever we put in is the latest and greatest, most efficient system. So another win. We employ a lot of people during the construction, and at the end of the day, we've created housing, which, as we all know, is a big problem in the city. So I think it's a real win-win.
I'm wondering, if those it sounds like those are not like the typical candidates. Those are more, I think, those are more creative, would you say?
Yeah, I mean they take a lot of surgery. Yeah.
Right. Makes sense there. So I know another thing that I've sort of heard that there's sort of some rules of thumb, I guess preferences, and that some of it I think is actually statutory, but that there's a preference in residential buildings for operable windows that you don't want to have more than 25 to 30 feet from the interior to the windows, and
Mm.
then also that bedrooms are required to have a window. And I think you mentioned that the code was changed to allow for, I guess it's almost like a windowless bedroom, but you don't call it a bedroom. So could you maybe speak to those sort of three things and what the workarounds are?
Yes, ideally, if you were building an apartment building from scratch, you'd put the elevators and the staircase in the center of the building, and you'd have 4 sides light. You'd have a very small corridor, and every apartment would just open up, and you would see the window from the door. These older buildings, weren't built as residential buildings; they were built for commercial occupancy and a different kind of density. So they didn't, as you notice when you get off an elevator in an office building, you could be 40, 50, 60 feet away from a window. So um, we have the zoning folks came up with a great idea, which was to create an interior room that did not have a window, and we call it a home office. And post COVID, it's actually quite popular because people who are working in their apartment want a place where they can go where it's quiet. They can get away from maybe their partner who's watching TV in the other room or their child who's making noise, whatever, and gives them a place to work or take a nap or whatever. But we mechanically ventilate those rooms, meaning that we bring fresh air, tempered fresh air from the outside into those rooms so they're not stuffy, much like having a window that you can open. Um, we heat them and cool them. And sometimes we put a glass door on that room, or we put something called a clear story, which is a rectangular piece of glass up high on the wall that borrows light from an adjacent room that's getting natural sunlight. So they don't have to feel like they don't have windows. They can be light and airy as well and connected. And they're, people love them. Nobody blinks.
Right, and then just for the ventilation on that, how does that work? Is it actually like a feed to the outside, or is it go into the
Yeah,
building's ductwork and
right,
that sort of further
right.
continues, or is it punched through a wall? How does that
No,
work?
no, no. So what we do is we put it's usually, within the room itself, there is like a water source heat pump or a VRF, something that provides heat and cool like you would have in any bedroom or living room. But in addition to that, we take a duct and we run it to the outside someplace, whether usually on the roof or a setback. And there's a unit that can create both cool and heat. So if it's 0 degrees outside, it has a gas or electric to it, and it warms the air before it discharges into the space. And if it's particularly hot outside, it cools the air before it's pumped into the space.
With respect to, developers converting their building, is there a typical, layout? Is there a preference for one bedrooms, or, how does the developer decide how to, um, you know, allocate the mix of different size apartments? Like what
So
are
there's
the
a
factors there?
Yeah, I mean, there are a couple of it's really market driven, and we work with marketing people to take a look at the mix that would be popular in the location that we're building. So if you're building in Midtown, for example, and you think that these are going to be family style apartments, you may want to have more, 2 bedrooms and 3 bedrooms. If you're building downtown and these are either kids going to college or kids getting their first job, you may want a mix of more studios and 1 bedrooms. But the zoning code for the most part stipulates that the average size apartment need be 690 square feet. So you can have a 10,000 square foot apartment, but then you'll have to have a corresponding number of very small apartments to offset so that the average aggregates to 690 square feet.
Mm,
And with that, Stephen, I just pardon me, and I don't
sure.
want to mislead anyone. There are some minimums, like you cannot have a habitable room less than 150 square feet. So you can't make these tiny, tiny, tiny units. There is kind of on the low end. There's the zoning prevents you from making micro size units.
Right, and then I suppose also depending on the size of the apartment, there's sort of some consideration for bathrooms and for bedrooms, right? So what's your take?
With that, I mean, it's again, it's a marketing issue. So downtown in the financial district, we see a lot of people. They're either couples or they're shares, they're roommates. So what makes it more attractive, whether it's a 1 bedroom or a 2 bedroom or a studio with a home office, is if there are 2 bathrooms, because two people would like their own bathroom. If you have a 2 bedroom with 1 bathroom, it's they get a place to sleep, but they're sharing a bathroom, so that it's more marketable to have two bathrooms in that case.
Sure. So during the construction process itself, what are the what are the major issues or the big considerations because I'm sounds like this is a big undertaking. So what do you do to sort of potentially keep cash flow going if it can, or just get the project sort of moving along in the most sort of streamlined manner.
Right. So we have a pretty, tried and true methodology. We have a process that we pretty much apply to each of these projects. We're always thinking about getting the heads in the beds, so to speak. In other words, how quickly can we create cash flow? So occupying a big building for a variety of reasons, you do in phases. You're not going to wait until you finish the 600th apartment before you rent the first apartment. So, hashing that out during the design phase with the design team, with the architect, with the mechanical engineers, we pick zones. It may have to do with high rise and low rise elevators. We'll take where the low rise elevators stop, maybe halfway up the building, and say the first zone is going to be below that point, or it could be a water zone because in tall buildings we worry about water pressure. So every 100 feet there's another break in the water zone. Um, so we think about um, phasing the job, and you also have to phase the job with the fire department because they want to know if they come in to fight a fire, the fire could be in an occupied apartment, or it could be in part of the building that's still under construction, and they want to make sure that they have all the tools that they need to fight a fire and keep the residents and the construction workers safe. So all of these things have to kind of be in place before you can occupy the first unit and start generating income. So that's the biggest obstacle is to really understand how you're going to get out before you even get in.
Right. So
Um,
I imagine that's a big part of what you do is just sort of the logistics with the owner and just, for that whole, project, keeping the timeline going and understanding what needs to come first. You're not reinventing the wheel.
yes.
The other thing, I think that's, relevant is sort of, zoning and building code issues. Now, I know we already talked about, light and the, bedroom window requirement, but, what, are sort of related to that? Like, what are the sort of issues that, an owner should be aware of, going into it? Like, just maybe it's just the structure of their building themselves or their neighbors. Like, what factors or factor, are important?
Yeah, I mean, I think at the end of the day, it's an economic issue. So, you're you have to understand what your building is and what it may want to be. Are you on the lot line? Are you starved for light and air? Is there a workaround that? What is your unit mix going to be if you have to, create deep or dark units as a result of your being kind of hemmed in? And at the end of the day, you know, what are you going to wind up with? I think those are the things. And for me, each building is very unique, and the advantage of an existing building rather than a new building is that in an existing building, it may not be designed as if you were building a new building from scratch, but it's already there, so you don't have to wait to dig a hole, to pour a foundation, to create a superstructure, to put a facade on before you can start working. In our jobs, we have an existing building. As soon as we change the windows, which we buy well in advance, we have an exterior wall. We can literally be working on every single floor simultaneously, as opposed to a new building where you kind of have to wait until the structure is coming up. So there's a big advantage to that. So I like to look at a building and see what I can reuse. How many elevators are we reusing? How many staircases are we reusing? Can we leave the electric closet where it is? And for the most part, office buildings, because they were designed for a much greater density than apartment buildings, the utility services are always more than adequate. So we're usually removing things rather than having to add things. So that's the way owners should approach it.
Sure. So what do you think there some of the, misconceptions are about, the conversion process that you probably hear things or owners come to you, and that they have some ideas in mind, are there any common misconceptions?
Yeah, the common misconception I would say is that they kind of perceive it to be like a big interiors job. Most commercial landlords have, over time, gutted a floor and rebuilt an office space, and they kind of think that this is what they're doing. They're gutting a floor, and instead of building office spaces, they're putting in kitchens and bathrooms. It's a lot more has to go into it. It's not as simple as that.
And then what about I know, that there's obviously zoning regulations and building codes, but what else, other than changing the codes or maybe changing the codes, are part of the sort of um, things that government can do. But is there anything else that the government could do potentially to sort of, make these projects more feasible in
I
your
mean, there had been a tax incentive called the 421G that was similar to a 421A for new buildings. It applied to existing buildings. I mean, they could reinstate something like that. I think that would be the biggest. Um, that would be the biggest, game changer. The other issue that they could deal with is changing the date um, uh, as to which these buildings could be 100% converted. I think now the cutoff is 1978. If they moved it to 1990 or something, or 2000 even, a lot more buildings would be able to be converted 100% as of right.
sounds like Mayor Adams should put you on a special task force to
I am on the task
Oh,
force.
right. So there you go. All right. So good. Government at work and being effective.
Yeah.
So how many years does or excuse me, how many months or years does one of these conversion projects, typically I mean I know they're all different, but what's the typical sort of timeline or what's your
Yeah,
goal?
and the scale that we work at, about 500,000 square feet and larger, it's usually a 30 to 36 month start to finish timeline. And again, uh, since we're working in an existing building, there's a lot of work that you can do before you get approval for change of use. For example, you can change the windows, right? And if you wanted to change a window in an office building, you could change it as of right. If you wanted to upgrade the mechanical systems, you could do it. If you wanted to modernize your elevator, if you wanted to do your lobby, there are a lot of things that we can do. While it's technically an office building, before the Department of Buildings rules on or determines whether or not the building is eligible for conversion or change of use, that we can do in the interim. So by the time we get an approved set of plans, we've already been working for months.
Right. So it's the kind of thing where you could potentially maybe not take the building offline and still generate some cash flow. Is that
Yeah,
the idea or is it
that
easier to
that
do?
is that is the idea. Yeah.
Right. So, I mean, I guess that you don't wanna have an empty building if you get retain some cash flow. It's not sort of you empty the building and then begin the process, or is it or does it depend?
Well, it depends. It depends on what the occupancy is, right? So if you have very little occupancy to begin with, and people are just in the way, you may just want to get them out. If you've got a lot of occupancy, you might look at it differently, and you'd have to keep those people alive while you're working. So there are some things that you probably have to do to the existing mechanical systems to make sure that you don't disrupt any services.
So 180 and 160 Water Street sounded like very interesting projects. Are there one or two others? I don't know if you have like any sort of sentimental
Yeah.
favorites because they were
Yeah.
interesting or just
So, the other project that I'm very proud of, that I really love, was 443 Greenwich Street. It's a condominium, and it's about 250,000 square feet. It was built in 1883 as a book bindery. It has a beautiful medieval courtyard. We made a porte cochere there. You can drive through. Beautiful planted interior courtyard. It's a celebrity laden building today. It's a we kept the original structure intact because it was landmarked, and we completely removed all of the interiors, including the wood joists. Um, and we replaced it with metal deck and concrete, and we built some spectacular condominiums there, and it was very, very well received in the marketplace, and it was just a really, really interesting project for me and my team.
It's obvious, from our offline conversations and this conversation, Michael, that you're very passionate about what you do. Curious, like what drives that passion? What is it about this that gets you going?
I think it's twofold. One is that I don't know, it's a chicken and egg thing. It comes easy to me. I don't know if it's because I've just done it a lot, or I have some innate understanding of what could be done. I mean, every building is different, and every building has a story to tell, and it's interesting to me to kind of reimagine it and take it apart and put it back together. And the other thing that I really love and I'm proud of is that I have a lot of people who I work with who have been with me since day one. So I have 20-25 year relationships with a lot of our own staff and the design professionals that we work with. So being in that and clients, and to be in that collaborative atmosphere with all those smart people around the room with one goal in mind is really and pushing each other to find better, faster means and methods and new technologies and so forth, is very stimulating, and it's not like going to work.
Yeah,
It's fun.
no, that's great. It's we've been living through
And you
some.
get to, and your the finished product is something you can walk by it. I mean,
Sure,
I
sure.
walk by, we've done, as I said, 40 buildings, 25 years. Most of them, a lot of them I walk by every day. So
Must be very gratifying to see you,
it is.
sort of
Yeah.
your handiwork, and people living and enjoying it on a daily basis. So yeah, we've been, it's been a very interesting time. I don't know if you'd say it's like a pivotal time in like New York's history. Just things have changed. I don't know if they're going back. I think you've been on the forefront of some of these things for a long time, and I think I don't know if it's a turning point now, but I guess we'll see. But it's been hearing all the things they've had to say. It's been very interesting for me. So I'd like to thank you. Hopefully our viewers have found it very interesting as well. And where can our viewers and listeners contact you, Michael?
So we have a website, www.ccm-nyc.com, and there's links within the website. You can see all of our work, all of our past work, and our current projects. And there's a link in there to contact us. And my personal email address is Siciliani, Siciliani, at ccm-nyc.com.
All right, Michael, it's been great speaking with you today, and take care. Looking forward to speaking with you again sometime soon.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you, Stephen.
Thank you for tuning in, and remember to make every day great.